Welcome to RPG Research and our weekly electronic role-playing game developers division working on the brain-computer interface project. We are now meeting on Saturdays from 10 a.m. to noon, in case you didn't catch that update a few weeks ago. And this is where we check in each week and work on our scope and progress updates, etc. Valerie, you're the team lead in all of that. And so how did, I was running Tolkien Moot and all of that last week. How did you guys do with last week running in parallel on your own?
It was good. We mostly just worked on kind of beefing up the Neverwinter Nights module, which we are going to need. It doesn't have to be today, but in the future we will need more work sessions to get that finished.
Great. Yeah, that's a good thing to keep working on. So welcome everybody. I'm so glad to see you all here. It looks like some good attendance today. Today is September 26th, 2020, continuing the year of the confirmed crit. And boy, what a year it has been for that, huh? All right. Did you guys have any problems? Valerie, were you able to manage the server and all of that okay on your own this time?
We didn't run the server because we had all been working individually on pieces, and I wasn't going to link them together until they were finished.
Okay. So you just basically collaborated on working on the different tweaks and such?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, well, if you want to go ahead and take over doing the roll call and all of that and manage the meeting from there, and we'll go from there.
All right. So Luke?
Here.
Dario?
I'm here.
Nick G?
Here.
Trevor?
Present.
Doug?
Here.
Zach? Zach, can you hear us? Okay, he's still muted, so I'm going to assume that he stepped away for a little bit. Tim?
Here.
Okay, and then we also have Nicholas kind of hanging out with us.
Nick, yep. Welcome.
The OG Nick.
Yep, I'm here. Sorry, I muted myself thinking I was unmuting.
So first I want to check that everyone has seen the discussion that was going on in the ERPG dev on Odoo, and also that everyone has checked in on Odoo, just on attendances. There's a lot of information as to systems and whether they would work for us in the dev discussion. And Hawk, since that was you, if you want to like briefly kind of skim over that as a recap, since it's like.
You bet. Boy, did I write all that? Oh my. Yeah, so I continued delving in a little more deeply. I was also looking, doing some market research and other things, and evaluating this. So one of the things, of course, we talked about is the underlying game system. We talked about we're going to use the Open D6 as our test game system, but we'll also want to pick a second one later to make sure that when we swap out a game system, that our abstracted percentage layer still works as desired, right? That the flavor of the underlying game system comes through, but that the mechanics remain, predictable and as desired from our abstraction layer. So OpenD6 is the one we'll start with. It's very simple mathematically, so it shouldn't create a lot of complexity for us to start for prototyping. Then later, what I think we'll probably want to do is see about maybe, I think we can use BFRPG, because it looks like OpenD6 is using the same license as BFRPG, and BFRPG is basically D20, but it's under the OGL, and that gives us basically a D&D clone for further testing. So that way we have two systems, and then that way when we flip it from one to the other, we verify that if people stick in whatever their favorite game system is, that our abstracted layer doesn't break. So that's just something to be aware of if any of you had missed that previously. And Valerie, you might want to add that. The BFRPG thing I don't think we had written into the scope, so that might be something to add into there. So we're going to start with OpenD6 for now, make sure that's working. But then we want to add the BFRPG system as well to make sure that it switches back and forth successfully. That was something I noticed was missing in our scope. That would be technical scope. So I dug deeper and deeper into the Pixie.js, Godot, OpenJDK, all the Python options, etc. So I'd like to double check in. Was it Tim who was the advocate for Pixie.js?
Yeah.
Yes, I want to double check with you first. Did you have any further information you wanted to add?
No, I think ending that client side hosting is going to be a big problem.
Okay.
And that's probably the biggest barrier to using that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that oh, there goes my camera. Gosh darn it! I need tripods with wider legs.
You could counterweights.
Boom here. Oh, and as soon as we put weight in the wrong direction with the cabling, it pulls it over.
You could buy counterweights or just put a little weight on the end of the boom.
I've got stuff. It's just the problem is with these narrow legs, because these are cheap tripods.
Oh.
We've broken the legs putting weights on. I just need to get decent tripods one of these days. Okay, almost there. Yeah, I just gotta tape some stuff and wire some stuff up here. It'll be fine. But I moved things around recently, so it's not as stable as it should be. Please just behave long enough. I'll work on you after the meeting. No. All right, sorry. Yeah, that's definitely what it looked like was going to be a real challenge. Let's see. It also looked like, other than the one JS BCI, it was kind of limited. It was good support for that one JS for BCI support, but that was it. It was pretty limited to that. There weren't other options. So for the BCI side, it was also a concern. Okay, so it sounds like you're comfortable with us then taking that off the list for this at this stage then? Okay.
Yeah.
You feel like we've done our due diligence?
Yeah. I just didn't want to leave it off the table, you know?
What's that?
I just didn't want to leave something that could have been,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Yeah.
Exactly. No, that's exactly how we work as a team, is if you have ideas, propose them. We do the best we can to delve into them, and then we do process of elimination and see what really is the best tool for the job. So I really appreciate you doing that. Okay, so I said I'm also still unsure about the Python-based options. What I've found as I dug deeper is it starts out pretty great, pretty easy to work with. There's multiple BCI options. There's the ability to do the hosting and such. It's got pretty good support, but as I started talking to experienced Python game developers and such, who had worked with other languages, what they said is Python. This is I don't want to overgeneralize this, but for at least the gaming developers I talked to, they said it starts out great and then it starts to get really difficult to manage. Because the hoops you have to jump through to make it do the games start getting kind of convoluted. And so while they were still big advocates for Python, they did give that caveat that if we're doing non-standard stuff, which we are, that might get kind of messy. After we get the initial baseline going, it could be more than our more novice developer team would be really. It could be frustrating, basically. So it's not a terrible option, but it definitely that was one of the warning flags, red flags there. On the OpenJDK side, there are frameworks I found that were sufficient. There's some BCI support, but all of it, the BCI side, the OpenJDK game development, all the extensions are pretty heavy technically, and so it would really require in-depth knowledge of all the OpenJDK libraries, and then the framework libraries, and then I'm worried we'll get so bogged down in just trying to learn the libraries, which is, I mean, part of being a good, robust OO developer is knowing your libraries, right? You save yourself a ton of code when you learn all those libraries. But I could not find any good documentation, walkthrough guides, or anything to really help everybody along with that process. It was all geared for people who were kind of already reasonably experienced Java developers who then wanted to do Java game development. And so I didn't see a good stepwise pattern for us to go down that road. As much as I would love to use Java for that, I didn't see an easy way. Like if I already had a team of experienced Java developers, I'd say, yeah, let's do this with Java. But we don't have that, and I think we could get bogged down for months just trying to train up on that before we ever actually work on the project, right? So that's pretty much taken that off the table, unless anybody has anything else they want to add on the Java side. Does anybody have any thoughts or comments on that? Okay. I know I was pretty much the only one kind of wanting that.
The only thing I didn't like about doing Java was the possibility of having to pay because the new license. But
No, but that was Oracle Java. We were sticking with OpenJDK.
oh yeah, I forgot
I
that
was
part.
only looking at OpenJDK, so that solved that. Yeah, no, there was no way. I told you, Oracle has ruined commercial Java. Just absolutely ruined it, and so there was no way I was going to use their version. So then it was looking at OpenJDK, and again, it's doable for an experienced Java developer, but if you don't already know Java fairly well, the learning curve was going to be pretty lengthy. And especially since this is all prototyping, that just didn't seem, again, if I'd put out the call for everybody, hey, need Java developers to do this, then we'd be fine, but we didn't. So we're a hodgepodge diverse group. So that just didn't seem like the best solution. So pretty much circling back to where we started a year ago and last month, that probably the best tool set, even though I really don't like C++ and C, original. C#'s fine, Java's fine. They improved the problems with memory management, everything that are so terrible about C and C++. Those offshoot derivatives, are fine. But C and C++ itself are so messy. I just, if it was at all possible to avoid going down that path. But everything I can find, here's the main thing. Godot has excellent documentation for beginners. It was designed for beginner game developers. And it has robust documentation that will walk us through step by step doing each of the things we want to do. It has multiple sources. It has an incredibly active community. The tool set's there. We don't have to really kludge it. It has step-by-step walkthrough of how to, it has a built-in server mode, right, to run yourself as a server and test it. It has how to write the code to make it so that your game can be server-based. It has all the pieces that we want to do in our scope. It has somewhere explanations how to do it, and a robust community to support that. Everything else was kind of a one-off that, well, we could get there, but it's gonna take some wrangling and difficulty. Python was the closest, but even that, when we started getting to the server hosting stuff, started to get the client side, client hosting stuff, started to get a little bit trickier in the documentation side. It wasn't as clear. It was clear that there was support for it. It wasn't as clear how to make it all work. And Godot just spells it out piece by piece by piece. And I think just like we did with the Neverwinter Nights Aurora tool set, it really helps us to have that stepwise tutorial for the level our team is at. What do you all think about that? I know we kind of spent a lot of time doing this, but we really want to make sure we're using the right tool for the job. Does anybody still feel like we need to reconsider the Python side or anything else before we pull the trigger on this? Valerie, you want to manage going around the group?
Yep. So just whatever opinions you guys have, even if you have no opinions, we're just gonna go through everyone. Let us know. So Luke.
I'm fine with going the Godot route. The only thing Python concern wise is the syntax for Python and GDScript are fairly similar.
Yeah.
But I think we should be fine. Like I think MIT's game, they have like a game design class I was looking at, and they said if you know this language, you know all the other ones basically. And I think we should be fine in that regard.
Okay.
Okay, Dario.
What was the reason that we chose, when we did choose Godot the first time, what was the reason that we didn't go the C# route? Was it because the GD script made it a lot easier for us? Or I guess the advantages of GD script?
It looks like most of the documentation and the support is geared towards the C++ side, and C# is not as well supported. It's there, but you need to be a really strong C# developer, and B, that we could run into some problems with missing support.
Okay. And so for the most part, we're going to go that route, right? We're not going to do the C# route?
Unless you find documentation to the contrary, which I'm open to, from what I saw, the easiest path for all of us with the best documentation, the best support, is using GDScript as much as we can, and then when we have to do under the hood stuff, we use C++.
Okay. Yeah, I'm good with that. I think we'll be fine.
Okay. Nick G.
I think Godot is just fine.
Okay.
Yep. Trevor.
I am 100% okay with Godot.
Okay. Doug.
Yeah, it sounds like the best idea to me too.
Zach.
Yeah, I'm good with the Godot. Sorry, I was a little late.
Tim.
Yeah, I'm good with Godot. I mean, we went full circle, and I'm glad we did, because now we don't have to wonder what if.
Okay, and Nicholas, did you have anything to add?
No comment.
Okay.
No comment.
Invoke the fourth or whatever.
Fifth.
Fifth. Fourth works too.
No, that doesn't work the same way. Okay, so, and actually, yeah, we've iterated now 3 times, because we did it back in August of last year. Then we iterated, we were going to go with it, we evaluated it, and then we went, well, let's look at all the other stuff, and then I kind of evaluated more deeply this 3rd time. So I'm feeling pretty good now that we're picking the right tool for the job, even though it may not be my favorite language and such, and it will certainly have its limitations and quirks. I think for our skill set, the team that we have, it's exactly the right match, and it was designed for exactly this, for beginning game developers. It really was designed for it. There is somebody posted in here, as long as there's BCI support. Yes, there's C++ and C-level BCI support, multiple libraries out there, so that is good. And let's see. Okay, then we've got some other scope. We've got more technical specification questions there that we'll talk about later. But as far as the language goes, yeah, I think we're okay on. So I think we're good, right? So let's put it this way: are there any nays to going with Godot using GDScript as much as possible, and then C++ as the under the hood? Now's your chance to speak up, so we can, if you still want us to delve into Python or something else. Okay. I'm going to say it's unanimous at this point. We're not exactly a democracy, but it's still, I want to make sure every voice has a chance to be heard here. All right. Well, finally, I mean, it may have been kind of full circle, but I think it's good for everybody's understanding. I think doing the process of looking into these things helped everybody have a better understanding of what we're trying to do and why this is the right tool set. And I think now that we have full buy-in, we'll be able to move forward with that. So that's excellent. So go ahead and start doing, if you haven't already, on your own time, start doing the tutorials on Godot. I know we had started that like last year, and then we kind of backed off as we focused on the Aurora and all that. If you haven't started doing the Godot tutorials, Valerie, do you have any of the links from before with that?
I do have the links, and we actually Not that long ago, we worked through some, or at least the beginning layout tutorials together.
Good.
But I will hunt those down and post them in chat.
Okay, and then we'll probably want to do just like we do with Aurora, where you actually walk through the whole group, making sure everybody understands those pieces of the tutorials as so we're all on board there.
Yeah.
Okay. Do your digital hand raising if you have been through some of the Godot tutorials. So in Jitsi. So we got Tim, we got Doug, we got Trevor, we got Luke. Got Zach.
Pretty much everybody but the next.
Oh, okay, good. All right. That's
Yeah,
good.
we did it. So I'm posting a link here. They have like a step-by-step tutorial, and we covered the first like half of them. So we didn't go into like exporting and onward, but everything before that we did as a group.
Okay, great. Okay, good. All right. Well, then I guess let's go ahead and get back to the scope and tech specs, so that when we do start writing the code, we've got a good plan for that. Looks like some questions were brought up about character levels separate from the modular game systems that could break. Yeah, so that definitely is a challenge where you have some game systems that have levels, character levels, and others that are levelless. They're skill based. We'll have to think of a creative way to interpret that, but ultimately the levels in game systems that use levels, ultimately it's still just a way to track skill development and combat rules and such, right? So if you, like in a D&D setting, you don't get more skill advancement until you go to the next level. In a levelless system, you get points that level up your skills, right? And so it's really ultimately the same thing as just when are the points given to improve the abilities, features, traits, whatever of your character. Is it done in kind of an artificial level system, which is a legacy thing, or a more natural skill progression system? So we'll, for the character sheet side, we'll have to be able to make sure that the level-based game systems translate through and show the level that the character is at. But for the game mechanics of gameplay, it will still just be percentage-based success or failure, which allows for gradients of success or failure. So, for example, BRP, not BFRPG, but BRP, basic role-playing, which is the Call of Cthulhu, Rune Quest, Stormbringer, all based on that. That's a levelless system. Your skills are all generally percentages and slowly go up from there. So ultimately, when they go to do an action, all our part of the game system is going to care about is what is the percentage chance of success or failure, roll percentile with whatever modifiers, and give them the result, right? That's ultimately what all the game systems come down to. So I did this years ago with SuiteGM, SuiteGM. I first started writing it back in the 80s for MERP and Rollmaster and AD&D in BASIC. And then, again, I did the same thing where you could import different game systems. So it was an abstracted layer. In the 90s, I did it with QBasic and Visual Basic. Then later, when Java became a thing, I did it in Java Beta, and then later Javas. And then I did an applet version, and then I did a server-side version, etc. And what I kept finding was that you can abstract all the role-playing games at this middle layer as a percentage chance of success or failure, as long as you allow for gradients. Because some game systems are binary success or failure, and some game systems are gradients of success or failure. So, for example, the One Ring role-playing game has success, great success, and extraordinary success. And then also it has failure, and then it has the Sauron Eye, which then triggers a whole other thing. So there will be little hooks that we will have to over time make for, or whoever is adding a game system will have to, like the Sauron Eye in the One Ring role-playing game, has nothing to do with the success or failure of the action you tried. Instead, it creates a hazard that you're going to have a worse encounter soon or something. You've triggered badness, which doesn't directly affect the gameplay in the moment, but it affects the long-term gameplay. That's extra stuff that we're not going to worry about in our prototyping. As the platform gets evolved and hopefully other people join and want to expand it, then we'll have to work into those hooks. But as far as action resolution, combat resolution, morale modifiers, responses, etc. of NPCs, they can all be interpreted as percentages with gradients of success or failure. And I think as long as we design that middle layer there, we'll be okay. And then the only reason we're not just using that is what I found is the underlying game system does give a little bit different flavor to how people play and to how those mechanics play out. A binary versus gradient success system plays out differently, even though our middle logic is still the same. And it doesn't break it, it just feels a little bit different. And so that's why we don't just use our own system that's just percentage-based everything and create our own system for a lot of reasons. That's why we do an interpretation of an underlying established game system. Does that make sense? Questions, comments on that?
I have a question. So like, so as far as like our game system wants to go, like how far do we really want to go prototyping? Because I understand like not want to do like bonus events or like random events and stuff like that too. But like, do we even want to include like combat in our prototype before like we publish or something? Or do we want just the story to like, do we just want to finish the story and then publish it and then we'll add in all that stuff later?
We want to replicate the whole reason you did the Neverwinter Nights version is we want to replicate that with our own tool set. So we're going to create the tool set, and then we want to recreate the whole Neverwinter Nights version of the Tempest Island that we created, and all the rounding that out that you're doing. We want to be able to recreate that exactly the same, but for our own game system, turn-based. It's a different game. But we want that whole storyline and the potential for combat and all those things to be, we can replicate it. That's the whole point, is that we create a similar tool system that's different and distinct because we're doing it, we have a different goal, and that it's 3 different genres, right? It's not fantasy only, it can be sci-fi or modern. But the amount that we want, of functionality we want, is as much functionality as we currently have available with the prototype Neverwinter Nights Tempest that we did. That's why we did that. It wasn't just a one-off exercise. It was practice for our goal. We want to be able to play the Neverwinter Nights version and then play our version. And the look and feel doesn't need to be the same or anything, but we need to be able to do all the same things that we are able to do in the Neverwinter Nights version. Does that make sense?
Yeah, we just want all the same tools in our project. Okay.
Yeah, we don't have to have all the tools, but the tools relevant to what the prototype is that we created. So as far as limiting it, because if we try to recreate every Aurora tool set, it'll take us 3 years.
Yeah.
Right, at least. But just what we did create with our prototype adventure, we just need to create those tools.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Yeah.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that? In terms of the multi-genre, I know we were talking about having those 3 kind of flavors, but shouldn't the tool set allow them to feed, the game builder to feed in all the descriptions, maybe a weapon attack description, everything like that, so that the actual game writer, rather than pick from an existing genre?
Right. So we are creating 3 prototypes as part of our testing to make sure that the abstraction of the nouns and such works.
Okay.
The game writer can then do whatever they want. But we want 3 different ones for ours to show, again, this is prototyping, proof of concept. So right now, Neverwinter Nights only gives us a fantasy version. I want us to show a sci-fi version and a modern day version. So again, we're doing the Mad Libs thing where if it's a weapon and it's a missile weapon, if it's a fantasy version, it might say crossbow. If it's a sci-fi version, it might say laser. And if it's a modern day version, it might say pistol. And so that we've just left those as a variable name, placeholder, that based on what you want it to be as the game writer, you fill in. So it's like Mad Libs, if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the 3 different genres are more for the prototypes than the tool set.
Correct. But we're making the game able to handle any genre is the whole point, right? So the tool set, I'm creating this adventure, here's your story, here's your choices. I want to do a steampunk genre. So we want to make sure it has the ability when it comes to the actions, like I pull the gun and shoot, that type of thing, that we've got a variable placeholder to put in different names as desired, in case they want to be able to use different genres of their own choice, right? It just allows that flexibility. So in our prototyping, we will use the exact same story and scripting that we already created in the Never Nights version, but when we equip the NPCs, etc., we'll have to make sure that those variables can be swapped out based when genre is, sci-fi, missile weapon, projectile throwing, whatever standard we says is crossbow, right? And if it's light or heavy, whatever, we can get into those details. We'll just start very basic. We don't have to have every iteration, but the point is that we can play the game through, and you could just flip the genre switch, for how you play the game, and it will give us those different characters, and the dialogue will change with just those little tweaks. And we don't have to get too crazy with it, but we want to make sure that it shows some of that difference. And then the story will be identical. What that does is it makes it more accessible because, as I've talked about before, the majority of people are not into sci-fi, fantasy, superhero, and horror. Horror is a little more borderline because a lot of people like that suspense stuff. What's defined as horror versus just slasher, people define differently. But sci-fi, fantasy, superhero, that's a minority of the world population. It's a growing, it's big money, but it's still a minority. A lot of people in a lot of different cultures around the world either have their own fantasy mythology mythology that's completely different than our westernized D&D type mythology, or B, are they much more interested in real world stuff. They're into family and social games and things like that. It's completely different in other cultures, and I wanted to make sure that we designed a tool set in a game that's able to be accessible to all those others. We have researchers on our team from Pakistan and West Africa, or we have had on and off. We just got a new one from Hungary. We've got one from Saudi Arabia. And as I've learned about them and their cultures and how gameplay is different from them, I wanted to make sure that our game system, that they can take and develop with it in their country and their culture. So that's why I just wanted, by doing those 3 genres as an exercise, so that the tool supports just basically saying this noun or this action can be a variable rather than a static thing. That's the key thing. It's just that we make what in other games like Neverwinter Nights is static, we set it up as a variable, and then that variable is based on just that genre choice. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. A simple array or something like that. I mean, it's so. All right. Any other questions, comments? Okay.
On the topic of technical scope,
Yeah.
one thing I thought of, I remember we were deciding between like some sort of XML-based pseudo database or some way to store these variables.
Mm-hmm.
I was looking. There's something on Git like lets you do SQLite style databases in GitHub. I don't think not GitHub Godot. I don't think Godot has like a native database or storage system by default.
Really?
So I can send that in the chat, but I have used SQLite with Android before, so it's not terrible.
Yeah, it looks
so
like
that might...
Godot talk to MySQL, no problem. Let's see about XML. There is a solved listing of how to parse XML in Godot. It says I'm trying to learn Godot engine. I need to parse a simple XML file for my game. I checked XML parser document. Unfortunately, I couldn't be succeeded. My XML file is very simple. Let's see, and then MySQL. So there is a module for so if we do want a database, MySQL support is there. That's not a problem if we want an actual database. I just, that tends to, I don't know. I'm really wrestling with, do we want to have a running database, because that's just a lot of extra moving pieces.
So in my experience, though, I've found that when you develop for mobile platforms and you use a file-based database, that the modules you end up using to be able to make that happen become too large for mobile.
Yeah.
In my experience, like I've
Not
tried
only
to do that within
mobile does
within a,
have those file
yeah,
system restrictions.
yeah.
Too.
So
All I know is that SQLite is everywhere.
Yeah.
Like
That's
it works on Android just fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, it's basically just like a file system pretending to be a database.
Okay, yeah,
and
I do
people
see
love
there's a
using.
GD native wrapper for Go.SQLite. Actually, there's several options, several different choices. All right, well, let's put that on our. We need to research that, because we do need to figure out how we're going to do our dynamic and static data storage and retrieval. Any of you have been in my training sessions get that. So when we talk about, okay, everybody get ready to take a quiz. The term I use when we're talking about what you need for a role-playing game, this is for tabletop, is you need some form of static and dynamic data storage and retrieval tool, pencil and paper. But I use the, programmer terminology. But we do need that. We do have to have some kind of static dynamic data storage and retrieval capability, and it's got to be able to support a multiplayer environment, even though it's turn-based. So we've got, luckily, since we're doing turn-based, we can do transaction locking. We don't have to deal with the transaction issues of a real-time game. That's much more challenging. That's, we're doing the turn-based because of brain injuries and developmental issues, but it also makes our development easier because we're doing turn-based, right? We don't.
Not to mention the latency from BCI.
That's the number one reason is the BCI latency, but it all has multiple benefits. And as we always say, if you're going to work with a brain injury, you need to choose a turn-based game. You can't rely on a real time because of the cognitive impairments from brain injury, and then that's also true to BCI. So let's Valerie, let's put in our what we all need to research is the best method for our dynamic and static data storage and retrieval tool, whether it's SQLite or something else. We want to pick the one. So now we're getting deeper, right? We've picked the high level. We're going with Godot. We're going with C++. Now we've got to make sure our low level tools were on the same page. And this is a pretty important tool because it's going to store our parameters. Yeah, I did a quick search. I'm seeing like 4 or 5 different options right away from different projects. Okay, parse JSON. Yeah, so that's something we're going to have to delve into more deeply. It's not something we'll be able to decide today. Yeah, definitely always make sure that we verify that it works on mobile friendly, at least on Android. Again, iOS is its own beast. As much as we'd like stuff to work on iOS, I don't really want us to get stuck too much just because iOS is... And iOS is expensive to develop for, right? You have to have your specific licensing. They're really restrictive on what they allow on the system. It's just not very relevant to our open source. What I expect to happen is if this project gets popular at any level, you'll have an iOS developer who wants to port it to iOS. So rather than us struggling with that, we let somebody else who's more specialized in that deal with it. As long as we're supporting web, Android, Windows, Linux, Mac, our scope, iOS can, be over there, and anybody wants to deal with that can deal with it. I just know that when you try to bring iOS into it, it can really bog down a project. So that's why we're not making that a priority. But yeah, definitely always make sure that whatever choice we take is supported on the mobile side as well. I'm glad I'm getting the feeling that Tim might be our mobile advocate to make sure we don't overlook that. Is that right?
I wouldn't go that far. I hate developing for mobile. I've just done it before. It's not fun at all.
My middle son, as I say, he's doing quite well for himself. That's what he's been doing for years, is mobile development, and I keep trying to get him to show up here, but he's a very busy fellow. And then my youngest son as well has been doing mobile development for a social media company as well, a small one. But pardon my throat here. Okay, so that's definitely something we want to delve into. So SQLite is a possibility. We need to look at the pros and cons. We need to make sure that it fits our higher level scope of platform requirements. But that sounds like a definite possibility. I was just throwing XML out there as a thing, but as you mentioned that with the mobile thing, I seem to recall that file permissions for XML and stuff like that can get a little ugly on the mobile stuff. I'm a little out of date on the Android stuff, but that is a good point. So if we find something that is inherently friendly to all the platforms we're working with and solves our problems, that's definitely the way to go, and has built-in Godot support or easily plugs into it. So thank you for bringing that up. Anything else? And that's definitely technical specification there, Valerie.
Okay.
So we have to research the SQLite, because we know at the technical scope we need some sort of static and dynamic data storage and retrieval tool. We don't know what the tool is, and we don't have to pick a tool. We just need to know what the parameters are of that tool that it supports the platforms. The technical spec is we're evaluating SQLite or XML or others. So that, and then once we nail that down, that will be in the technical spec. So right now we have a list. Yeah, PostgreSQL, but that's a bigger beast. I mean, that's a lot more muscle. Like a dedicated server, like if you're setting up as a dedicated Windows or Linux server, that makes sense. But PostgreSQL is meant to compete. So there was MySQL and PostgreSQL were the two main open source databases. Later, Sun Microsystems acquired MySQL, the rights to MySQL and all that. And MySQL was always an alternative, like, for example, to Oracle or IBM DB2 and such, which were these full-blown, expensive databases. And MySQL, for a long time, didn't have transaction handling and all this other stuff. Later, it did and became more robust. PostgreSQL started as a more robust database system than MySQL, but slowly MySQL kind of caught up to it. But PostgreSQL generally is a more robust database. Okay, somebody's got a list of SQLite editors for Mac OS X Windows. Okay. Yeah, so let's stick those in there and in the technical specs to be researched. The different database options. We want to pick the one that's going to be the least painful and does what we need to do for the job. Has enough flexibility, but isn't overkill. My suspicion is PostgreSQL is overkill, is way more overhead than is necessary. And I have no idea how that runs on a mobile environment. But it's generally...
I mean, I think part of the benefit of SQLite is that you can move to, like, if you decide you need to, you can move to MySQL if needed.
Okay.
Or something like that.
Okay.
Because it uses all the same SQL queries and syntax.
I mean, I know I've done a lot of projects that have used SQLite, and then I've gone to either MySQL or PostgreSQL or MariaDB or Mongo or any of those variations. So I've definitely seen that, but I never really looked under the hood for SQLite. So, but let's look at that. Let's put that high on our list. Let's look at SQLite. Let's see what the pros and cons are. Look for, especially we want to make sure if anything where it is a no-go. That's what we want to look for, is if there's a problem there. And yeah, so Zach's got a list there of things to look at too for editors and such. So that's good. So that's good in our technical scope and spec there. What else do we need to cover, Valerie, in our scope and spec?
I have a list of questions that we had discussed at previous meetings. So I'm just going to read them in the order I have written them down. The first is, what order are we developing in game engine and game one by one or at the same time?
What?
So are we developing the game engine at the same time as we're developing the game, or are we going to develop just the game engine and then do the game in it once we're done?
So we need to develop the tool set to create the game, the adventures, and we're using, we're going to have to look at some default options in Godot for how to play the game, but my understanding of this process, for example, the same way that BioWare did it, is they spent 2 to 3 years writing the tool set, you know, and yes, you have to have the engine to test that your tool set does what it needs. There is kind of a parallel task there. Normally what a company would do is have different developers break off to different teams, but we want to stay working together as a cohesive team here. If we got, you know, if we had 20, 30 developers, then we could afford to break off into different teams. But with the resources we have, we want to kind of just work on it a piece at a time. So I think what we want to do is probably get the most fundamental mechanic of the game engine first. Just that's something that we can just do, you know, hard code a little. We give it a script or a data file that says run this game, and it just does the basics, right? Just the bare bones minimum that you can submit and it runs, that Godot can use. Because then when we create our tool set, you need to be able to run, when you make your little mini adventure, you need to be able to run and test it, right? Just like we did in Aurora, you can go and load your game and test that it worked. So there's a back and forth there between it. So, but I think as far as at a design level, before we start writing code, the design of our tool set, I think, will kind of dictate what we need to make sure the engine includes. So I think we, at the design level, focus on our tool set, what we want the minimum viable product to be for the tool set. We use the Aurora example that we did for Neverwinter Nights as our template. We don't want to rip it off directly or anything, but we use that as our guideline of, okay, we need to have the ability to make different squares of area, right? You know, even though it's text-based initially, we still have to track where they are moving in coordinates and such. So we got to have a size of space because that affects memory issues and such. That's your beginning palette. We need to know which tools are the minimum that we need to include and what those category tools are. As we work that out kind of more on this user side, the tool side, we can then probably, as we're learning Godot, have a better idea of when we build the engine, how to pair those two. Now, again, we could do it the other way, but it seems to me that where we're at, working together as a group, it makes more sense to do it from the building the tool set design first, then the basic game engine to respond to that tool set as far as the actual writing code, and then the actual writing code of the tool set. So we got tool set design, write code for the engine, write code for the tool set. Does that make sense? And there's more than one way to skin this cat. What does everybody think on that?
So I'm kind of a little bit confused, like not so much on the, like what we need, but like on the order that we need it. Cause I mean, just going off the Aurora tool set, like I feel like they already have their engine, so they can see what their tool set's like doing a little bit better than ours, which is
right.
Kind of where I'm getting confused, because I assume that, yeah.
We won't write any code for our tool set first. We will design our tool set. We will pseudo code it, basically.
Okay.
Right. We won't write any Godot code, although we'll look at how Godot can. We'll just do the GUI stuff, right? We'll just kind of lay out. Oh, we want this feature and this feature, and we want it like this. So we'll sketch it out. We'll do pseudo coding and just design it the way we want it. Oh, thank you very much, dear.
Okay, that makes more sense to me. Okay,
that's what I'm saying. Is so we're going to do it from a GUI down to engine, back to GUI design. So design doesn't mean any code. It means we lay it out the way we want it, and we do pseudocode.
Okay.
Then we write the engine that now we know what we're trying to map to, right? What kind of features we're working on. Because that's part of what I'm trying to figure out is how do we figure out our minimum viable product? Well, if we look at the prototype that we did, all of you kind of have a good feel of which pieces of that tool set you used and didn't use, right? There's a lot of the Aurora tool set we did not use for our prototype, correct?
Yeah.
And that's how I want to keep our scope smaller, is only use what we had to use And if there were things in there you didn't like how it was done in Aurora, go, there was this feature, but I had to click through like 7 things to do it, and I did it all the time, and it sure would have been nice if it was just 2 clicks in a property or something. Then we design ours to be better. You see what I'm saying?
All right. Well, the first action for something we should change. I hated using the camera in Aurora toolset. We should definitely fix that.
Well, okay, so remember, our game for phase 2 is only text-based.
Yeah.
So you don't have to worry about that at this stage.
All right, good.
No, for phase 3, it just plays the pre-recorded clips. So did you watch, maybe you missed that. I told everybody to go watch a video of Dragon Quest with Dirk the Daring.
Dragon's Lair.
Sorry, Dragon's Lair.
Oh, no.
Okay.
I haven't seen that.
Oh, okay, so go to YouTube. Everybody needs to see this because this is fundamental to how we're doing this. This is how we're layering on.
The guy narrating was pretty cool.
Yeah, was there a link that I sent specifically?
Oh, maybe you didn't. Maybe I just... No, I think you did, right?
I did send a specific link. So there's a DVD full playthrough.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Yeah, so this was the world's first CD-based video game. Disney released it back in the arcades back in the 80s, and it was it ate a lot of my coins. And all you had was a joystick, and you had like 3 choices every time something came up, and you had to choose left, right, or center basically if you didn't respond. And there'd be a brief flash of which option you're supposed to pick to get through it. And if you picked, and then whatever choice you picked, it would then play that animated video clip based on your selection. Yeah, if you just go to YouTube and type in Dragon's Lair.
Oh yeah, I found the link.
Okay,
I scrolled up in Odoo.
Good. Yeah, okay. I thought I posted that a while ago. So you want to watch that through. That is how we're doing this when we get to the graphical level. We're doing a text-based, turn-based game. When we layer on the graphics and audio, all it's going to happen is when you make your choice from your menu-driven options, it will then play the clip that we want. Now, as far as what that clip looks like, we have a couple options. There's CGI options, which has its own challenges. There's partnership with Zombie Orpheus Entertainment that they record actors in outfits and then play real actual film, which they did that for a video game many years ago, a Morpeg, that there was the game went under because of internal fraud, but the developers worked on that and know how to do it and write for it and everything. But the key thing is it just plays video clips that show you the result of your choice, right? Each time. As each person makes a choice in the group, it then plays it out. So, yeah, if you have not yet watched Dragon's Lair, that is one of your assignments for understanding what we're doing. So you will not have to deal with the camera angle stuff because this is a completely different game than Neverwinter Nights in that respect, since it's not real time. So I hope that helps clarify that. So you want to figure out camera angles. Yay!
All right, that's kind of looking forward to that.
I agree with you, Zach. That camera angle thing was
I just
atrocious.
hated having to move my mouse down to the arrows, and I'm like, dude, can I just use the arrow key? Like,
yeah. Now the drawback is, however it is shot in either video, animation, or live video, that's the way it's shot. You have no control over that camera angle, but it will hopefully be shot in a way that's easy to see. So, because again, this is not a real-time game; it's a turn-based game. So, and we'll have to decide. Here's one of the things I keep going back and forth on. There's 2 ways to do this turn-based thing. One is simpler than the other, and I go back and forth on this in my head, and so I'm just wide open. I'm always, open to suggestions here if that's not clear. When you do the turn-based thing, one option is everybody makes their choice in that. So let's say it's around, you're fighting the monster, and then it comes back to the group, right? Because we are doing multiplayer, even though it's turn-based. Now, everybody on your side, based on your initiative or whatever, what is that noise? I keep hearing a whistling in the background.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought I was muted.
Okay. So one option is when it is the PC's turn, everybody makes their selection in that round, and it doesn't play out the actions until everybody's made their selection. And then once they've finished, the last person's made their selection, it then plays out in whatever order is appropriate, the video of what happens next. So that's one option. The other option is, as each person makes their selection, it plays the video out for that selection. There's pros and cons to either approach. So the advantage of doing it all as a group first is we can create, if we wanted, I don't know if we want this or not, it's probably too much complexity. You can do like a voting system, but I don't want people's options to get removed so they can there's a lot of different ways to do the group thing that creates some complexity, but also some interesting things that happen, because what happens then is you get a whole series of actions happening in a nice series of clips that can be kind of fascinating to watch, as opposed to a more stilted play a clip, now your turn, play a clip, now your turn, play a clip, now your turn. You get basically batch play. I don't really know. Maybe that's a feature we can enable. I don't know, where we could say, do you want batch play or individual step play? In theory, I think that could be a switch that the players could flick in theory. So I have not been able to decide on that one, and that's that's still a technical scope item there, Valerie. So for turn-based, do we do it in batch resolution or individual resolution? That would be something. Or do we offer a feature where the player can decide that? Or the writer, DM, whatever, can make it hard code, say, no, only play it this way. Do we want that to be a variable option, or do we want to do it only one way? That's the question. What does everybody think?
I honestly don't have an opinion yet, because I'm not sure how. I'd rather get into more of the actual implementation before I kind of make a decision on that, at least.
That's fine. We can just leave that as a to-do that we'll need to address. Any other thoughts from anybody else?
I just think personally doing it player by player, step by step would get repetitive.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm in favor of either not doing it or having a switch.
Okay. So you'd prefer the batch option?
Yeah.
Okay. Anybody else?
It seems like there's no reason not to make it an option.
I long-term, I have no problem with that. The question is that necessary for our minimal viable product as far as trying to not get too complicated in our feature set? Right.
Probably not necessary for the minimum.
Yeah, but I think we want to have it written down as a potential feature, maybe a 2.0 or 1.1 or feature expansion. I think for our minimum viable product, even though it may get monotonous, we should pick one or the other, but have a placeholder for flipping that switch for future functionality. What does everybody think of that?
Yeah, that sounds more, how do I say it? It sounds doable.
So Barry, let's put that we want to offer either batch or step-by-step turn-based resolution, but that will have to be a future release. For now, we have to pick one. We don't have to pick one right this minute, but we're going to need to pick one option or the other. I think, well, no, we can pick this now. I think we can logic this through. Let's do a little, some thought experiments here. In my head, the one at a time process is simpler because you don't have to worry about queuing things up, right? You make a selection, you play through. Now the next person makes a selection, play through, and you're not having to worry about batching those things up. So in my head, it seems like that's the simpler option, even if it's not the most fun option. But as far as prototyping, what does everybody else think about which would be an easier option to code?
Well, I guess it kind of would depend on what all the players see it, since it's going to be multiplayer. Would all the players see, or would you just see the option?
It would depend if they were in the sphere. Like if they're all together, then they would all see it play out, right? They would see it happen. If they're in separate rooms, then only the people that are in the room room could see it, right? We'll have to figure out the logic for that. Let's put that in the technical specs, Valerie. Scope of vision. So, and to define that means what other PCs can see relative to distance or obstacles from each other. So even though we're not doing a real-time graphical game, we still have to take into account the basic logic of that. And I did that when I wrote my first digital electronic role-playing game in 1979 on Apple II, maybe? I think it was an Apple II. You know, it was pretty much all if-then statements and such. But I had in there logic that basically, if you made a choice and you were in this room, you could see X. But if you made a choice and you were in this other side of the same room, you would see Y. And it's the same thing. It's just like, well, we're gonna have to keep in track of, you know, because the good thing is, since it's all menu driven, we can through the twinery branching logic and all of that, we can account for what's visible when and not, right? So, you know, they have a limited number of choices. We're generally going to want to discourage them from splitting up the party for the prototype, right?
Yeah.
So can I ask a question
Please.
in terms of, I think it's relative to this in terms of controls.
Mm-hmm.
For the BCI, it seems like there has to always be a limited set of options that you can select almost temporally.
Yes. Good.
So we're not envisioning a situation where there's hotkeys or they're always responding to a menu choice.
At this stage, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, you will, you know, first it's just text-based, and then later we'll have graphics with a nice, pretty menu, like, you know, a lot of JRPGs and stuff, like, you know, how they have a nice, look at a lot of JRPGs, right? A lot of them pop up the menu, what do you want to do next? So that would be phase 3. Phase 1 is just text-based prompt, right? Here are your different options, you know, 3 options or so at a time. Use your brain to move, you know, to select the option, to move the cursor to the option you want, and then click, basically. Because the most simple version of the BCI is like if you saw the Mario thing, you know, just a trigger, and so you can like just move a cursor, a space, right, and then get what you want. We don't know the exact of this, but we're going to make it as simple as possible. We're still waiting for the money from Worldcon to come in, but they've got a check for $4,000 they're sending our way as a donation for the work we did to help Worldcon not be canceled. And we have approval from our board that when that arrives, I can spend between $1,000 to $2,000 on the BCI equipment, because the equipment I have right now, the Open EEG equipment, is you know 20 years old, versus this BCI stuff is a newer generation, has more capabilities. But I did hack Neverwinter Nights about 10, 12 years ago to play with my Open EEG equipment, which only had 5 electrodes, right? That I took my motorcycle head sock, you know, for inside a helmet, and I attached the electrodes and put those on there, and I made it work, and I was able to do a very rudimentary moving around the room with Neverwinter Nights by redirecting the I/O at the Linux operating system level, right? Using the BCI software the EEG software to intercept the requests. And at first it was just out of control, and then over time you learn to control it better. So if I could do that with a primitive 5 electrode Open EEG, you know, more than 20-year-old system, if you look at the newer BCI stuff, it's way nicer. You know, right now it's conceptual, but there shouldn't be a problem moving a cursor and making a selection, right? That's what I'm envisioning here, is that you have the ability through BCI to move the cursor and basically click with your brain. And so it's just a matter of moving through the array, right? If you've got an array of 3 choices, move, you know, either just click where you're at, or move and move and then click. And that's basically all you need to do with that kind of menu-driven option. That's how I'm trying to envision it, as simply as possible. And so I think for 1.0, in our scope, let's say you can't split the party. How's that sound?
Sure.
I'm okay with that.
Splitting the party creates so much complexity of viewpoints. But we do want in future versions the ability for different viewpoint perspectives. So let's put in the 2.0 wish list different viewpoint perspectives, but 1.0 everybody's kind of in the same perspective as a group, kind of huddled together as a group. You all get to do your own thing as your own character. So again, the mechanics are going to be very limited because we're doing the minimal viable product.
Well, aren't we all like making a decision as a team anyways? Like,
No,
isn't there going to be...
That's where the batch option. See, if you want to do the batch option, then you have everybody have a voting system, because that's what, unless you're going to mandate being unanimous, you have to have a voting system for that. And
So are we not going with like the whole like party leader, the talker style from Neverwinter Nights?
We're not going to mandate that in the game system. What we want, so from a therapeutic perspective, we teach our clients that they need to do these things, but it's not a game system mechanic. It's something they decide. So they can, as a group, decide that, hey, Mike is going to be the team lead, and we, let's all talk with him. Let's decide what we want to do, and go from there. But everybody gets to make their own individual decision in the simple version, right? Again, because if we avoid the batching system. So again, minimal viable product. We can add features later in 2.0. So we could say possible wish list is a group voting or consensus option for 2.0. But for now, each person makes their own decision while observing what the other does. And remember, once somebody makes a decision, that may change what the next decision is. So if I go ahead and attack Prospero rather than negotiate, I've just changed the options for the rest of the party. And from a therapeutic perspective, what that does is it creates a situation where he goes, hey, why'd you do that? We should have worked together. Well, let's have a conversation about that, right? But the consequences play out in the game. Then we have a conversation about what decisions could have been done differently. How could you have worked together? We don't have to dictate that in the game. So from as far as that therapist perspective, we don't need to dictate that. That's something that is let me give you an example. If any of you want to go watch, last year we did Extra Life again. RPG Research did. We've done it a few times. Are you guys familiar with Extra Life? Anybody not familiar with Extra Life?
That's the donation for gaming charity stuff or whatever.
Yeah, you do a
right?
24-hour gaming marathon to raise money for the Children's Hospitals program. Raises millions each year.
Okay, I knew kind of what it was. I'm like, wait, what's the exact details?
You can check it out at extra-life.org. So we've done it a couple of times. And like 2015, 16, 17, whatever, we did the tabletop marathon. And then last year we went ahead and did it with Neverwinter. We did a combination. We went back and forth between tabletop and Neverwinter Nights. And when we did the Neverwinter Nights one, the players were kind of all over the place. And it was interesting because my trainees were not applying, like when they would do the tabletop, everybody would say, okay, cover this. Like they kind of knew how to work with each other as a group. As soon as they went in the video game, everybody just started going off and doing their own thing in Neverwinter Nights. They did not work together. They didn't communicate. And you could watch all this on video. And I was kind of frustrated that they were just kind of bumbling through. So I did what I called the crucible to them. I started, with the DM client, I started adding all kinds of monsters and more monsters, like literally layers and layers of monsters to just make it really frustrating. And the point was to get them to start to work together. At first, they just got really, well, they're still angry with me, but I can take it. The whole point was they needed to start norming. None of you, I don't think any of you have been through the training, but part of our training, we talk about Tuckman's small group dynamics and small group formation and communication. And these in the business world, and it's known as forming, storming, norming, performing. So forming is you bring together people who've never met each other before. They have no previous baggage. They're all kind of polite to each other. Hi, Steve. Nice to meet you. Hey, I'm Michelle, blah, blah, blah. And you each have your different skill sets, but you don't really know who the leader is necessarily. You may or may not. And there's a lot of milling about and not a lot of work getting successfully done. Then eventually people get frustrated, like, hey, we've got timelines coming. We've got to get this going. people start trying to step up as leader or start making decisions, and people start butting heads, and the niceness kind of falls by the wayside to various degrees. And eventually, if the group is able to get there, and some groups never do, they get to norming, where they say, okay, Mike, you're the warrior. You go ahead and, you be the muscle here, and you stand in the corridor there to keep the zombies from coming. Michelle, you're playing the rogue. We've got to get this door unlocked before those zombies overwhelm the fighter. Why don't you go ahead and start trying to, pick the lock and disarm the traps on that door? George, you're the cleric. Why don't you be ready to heal her in case something goes wrong, or keep an eye on the warrior? I'll, as the wizard, start buffing you guys up, etc. And so you're verbalizing what everybody's going to do, whether it's one person or you do it as an egalitarian thing. Whether you have a leader or it's egalitarian is not directly relevant. The key thing is you're communicating what you're going to do, and you're working together as a group, but you're having to verbalize it. So that's norming. You're norming your roles in each situation. And that's
Hey, Hawk.
critical. Yes.
I have to go for a little bit.
Okay.
My sister joined the Navy. This is the first
Oh,
time she just
nice.
called, so I haven't talked to her in like a few months. So
Sure,
I got.
you bet.
I'll come back once that phone call's
Okay.
over.
And you can always watch the video if you need to catch what I'm
Yeah,
talking about.
no problem.
Okay.
See you guys.
Yep,
I'll be
see
back.
ya. So that's norming, and when you get to norming, you can have a successful project. You can successfully beat the baddie, but it's a struggle. It's a lot of work, and you have to go very carefully. Where the magic happens is if you get to performing, where you no longer have to verbalize these, where everybody just does it automatically. Steve automatically goes to the corridor and stops the zombies. Michelle automatically goes to the door and starts disarming the traps and picking the lock. And the cleric does his thing, and the wizard does her thing. That all just becomes automatic, and they just do it. That's performing, and that's also when you start now having. We've talked about flow state before, being in the zone. Excuse me. Most of the time, individuals will have flow state experiences, but when you have a group performing, that's when you can have an entire group experiencing flow state together collectively. It's a wonderful experience. So what I was seeing with this Neverwinter Nights Extra Life session last year is they were stuck in forming. They weren't even storming, really. They started to storm when I started throwing monsters at them, and at first they didn't know it was me, and they were just getting killed left and right. And eventually they realized it was me, and they're like, Hawk, stop it. They're like, no, you guys are all over the place. You need to learn how I'm only doing enough monsters that it is beatable if you guys work together. But you got to work together as a team, and you need to get to that norming performing phase, or you're not going to get there. So for the next 2 to 3 hours, and everybody was pretty tired by now because it was 8-9 p.m. and we'd started at 8 a.m. They all cursed my name, and they still do to this day. But you can watch as they transform from a completely just all going off and doing their own thing to they all started to get really efficient at taking out the enemy. And I literally just had layers of goblins and what have you that were spaced a certain distance apart, and they learned how to draw them out, kill a few, then draw a few more out and kill, and they all started to work as a team and communicate. And then after the communicating, they started to just do it automatically. And then at the very end, which kind of defeated the learning lesson, because they were really feeling good, they built up competence and confidence, and it was showing how it worked. I didn't know in Neverwinter Nights that these certain bandit type NPCs communicated with each other. So I'd been using mostly dumb creatures that they would only attack on sight, and they didn't really communicate. Well, these bandits, once one sees you, they communicate to all the others in the chain. So now like 40 of them charge the group. And so the group got whomped, and I'm like trying to kill the bandits as fast as I can to stop it, because I was defeating the lesson. I was showing them that they could be effective. So unfortunately it ended there on kind of a sour note there because of that glitch, and I had to kind of lecture them like, no, you guys did great, it really worked out. Well, at the end, like, that was a glitch, ignore that, pay attention to this part, learn from this. And some people took that away and learned from it, and some people didn't. So that's forming, storming, norming, performing, and we don't have to, in the game mechanics, enforce that. That's something that happens through gameplay organically. So we don't have to say, you are the group leader. We can certainly add in later features an assignment that says somebody's the group leader or caller, and after talking, everybody gets to decide what the group action is. That can be later. But for now, we want them to be individual actions, have some means of communicating with each other, whether it's text or voice or whatever, that they can discuss what they want. I wonder why it went there. Is this other phone not working? Oh, it's on. They can discuss what they want, but ultimately each person decides their PC's fate rather than a group collective. Does that, I mean, I took a long time to come back to say that, but does that make sense now?
Yes.
Yeah, it makes sense to me.
Yeah, because if you do the group vote thing, you don't get the same storming effect of people going off and doing their own thing and pissing other people off, basically, right? Like, oh, fine, I'll just do what the group says, whatever, you know, or that people just, you know, rage quit or whatever. With everybody able to choose their own actions, and then the group going, hey, why did you do that? Why didn't we, you know, we should have done this together. It creates that opportunity for those social dynamics to actually happen through causality, to actually see cause and effect, if that makes sense.
I have a question too relative to that in terms of like skills, for example.
Yes.
The person who submits the choice, unless each of the interactions you then designate which member of the party is doing them, it seems like maybe there needs to be individual input. For example, if you had to like, I don't know, open a lock, like who gets that role?
Right. This is the difference between batching and doing individually. And doing individually is easier programmatically. We could do a batching thing where each person says what they do and then it plays out in that batch. We can certainly do that. And all that is creating a queue, right? An array, a vector, whatever you want. You just queue up the choices and then it plays them all out in whatever order is appropriate. It's totally doable. It's just a little bit more complexity. So I think just for minimal viable product, we stick with one person at a time, but they're always together side by side. So we don't have to worry about all the different, well, they're the opposite end of the room, etc. Everybody does things as a group, but they each get to choose what their PC does. I guess an example would be, have any of you ever seen, let's see, let me see if I get the name right. These are all legacy things, but they're my best visual references. The video game Crossbow. So, no, be quiet. Skip the ad.
Seems like you might have to handle the time of choice as well.
What do you mean?
If you allow the batched, several people could vote to complete the same action at the same time, whereas only one character can do it in the storyline.
Yeah, again, we don't have to worry about transaction collisions and all of that. It's one at a time. It's really simple. So let me pull up here's a really simple video game. Again, I'll use a lot of these because they express the concepts in a nice visual way.
I'm back. What did I miss?
I finished my lecture about Tuckman's group dynamics and about why we're still discussing about why individual turn-based is better than doing it as a group batch or something like that, or a vote or whatever.
No problem.
We're still kind of discussing that. Why that's much easier programmatically, and why it allows for certain social dynamics to happen that we want from a therapeutic perspective. Why? Come on, keyboard. Something must have unplugged. The camera's working, but I'm not getting...
Did we take our break today?
We did not.
Okay.
Do you want to hurry and take a short break?
Yep.
Let's do that.
12:30, I guess.
Yep.
Well, it's 11:30. We'll just take a short break. 5 minutes. Yeah, it depends on your time zone. All right, we'll be back in about 5 minutes.
0.
I am back.
Is this your screen, Hawk? Okay. What is this? Oh wow.
Oh yeah, I like that game. Back.
All right, so this is that video game Crossbow I was mentioning from apparently 1983. Boy, I'm feeling old. I put a lot of coins in this one as well. So the premise here is that you have a group of adventurers that you have to escort from one end of the screen to the other without them getting killed. Now that's obviously different gameplay than what we're doing, but the concept that I was trying to express is that imagine that you're the person. So the video game was set up in a way that there was a physical crossbow on the. So instead of a button and joystick, they mounted a crossbow on the front of the game, and then you had the screen there, and then you had to sight down it and shoot with the crossbow, which was kind of an interesting gimmick that made it fun. Kind of like Duck Hunt, right? But the point is that you're trying to protect the adventurers as they go through all these hazards. So imagine as a group kind of taking turns protecting each of your characters going through. They all go through the same scene. Imagine them a lot closer together. What happens is as you progress, they get closer together. They're spread out at first to help you make it easier so they don't get killed at once. So I'm going to just play through this and jump a few screens. But so when I mention crossbow, you have an idea. So here you have choice of different paths. You choose the red path or the green path. One's harder than the other in different ways. And you got a little crossbow that you're shooting to stop the monsters from taking out your and we'll measure rewards to play, etc. So adventure 1, adventure 2. You got the idea. I don't think anybody dies on this one. So jump to the next one. Another at the end.
This game's like reverse Lemmings.
Reverse what?
Lemmings, the game where like
Yeah.
the
So you get a new friend added when you survive, right? So that gives you more lives, basically. And then you've got initial paths to pick now, depending on what challenges you want to take on. Oh, for crying. YouTube, you're getting way too spammy. So, I'm going to pause for a second here. I did back in 2004 some neurofeedback technologies with, I was experimenting between standard neurofeedback, bioneurofeedback, and using music at the same time. I'd play like a Native American wood flute or guitar or whatever while trying to do the activities. And they had different games that you played with your brain. And it was based on the parameters of what you were going for. You set the frequencies, and if you're trying to work on focus, or you're trying to work on reducing stress, or you're trying to work on calming or more energy, whatever it was. And one of the games is literally just a volcano exploding, and when you were doing certain, when you achieve certain tasks, so there's a path that you need to stay on. When you stayed on the path, and the better your brain was in the mode of the frequencies that you wanted, the faster you went along the path. And then if you did really well for a sustained period, the volcano in the distance would erupt and such. So it kind of reminds me of that BCI there. It's an aside, but still, it just kind of, this is how primitive, this is 1983, what we now call BCI, but back then was neurofeedback EEG equipment. This would be fairly high resolution for the 2004 EEG games. Right? So if you look, have all of you taken a look at the BCI Game Jam from last year? Because that was also on the to-do list for everybody. If you haven't,
I'm not finished with it, but yeah, I
the
started
idea.
it.
So
I
you notice
did.
the graphics are a bit better than this. They're more Mario level, so they're still kind of 8 to 16-bit world, but they're a little bit better than this. But you get the idea. Again, we're not doing this as far as graphics. I just want to point out that we've got a scene. You have the adventurers here. There are different dangers. And instead of a single crossbowman, each person is taking a turn on what their PC does. Right? As these not real-time things that working. You're all in the same scene. See, he just died. You're all in the same scene together. But each PC has to make a choice. Now, it might be that they choose to help buff up a friend, right? Maybe you noticed that the previous round, one of the other PCs got weakened by an attack. So your selection might be, heal a player if you're the cleric or something like that. And we'll have to make sure we allow a limited amount of that. We don't want to get too complicated because there's too many things. Inherently for minimal viable product, there aren't going to be a lot of options initially. Just like with Neverwinter Nights, we can go back and flesh it out and add to it all we want. We want to give just the very basics. So I guess in our technical scope, Valerie, we want there to be in the menu options, besides just taking direct story action, an option to interact, an option to help another PC. That should be an option we take into account. That we didn't need to be explicit about that in Neverwinter Nights because the game mechanics, you didn't need to put that in the menu, right? In the menu of Neverwinter Nights, that was just for the NPCs, but you could just use a mouse to click to help another player, right? And our game doesn't have that capability, so that's something we want to make sure we have a menu option that says, option 1, do this to the NPC. Option 2, go to the other room. Option 3, help one of your PCs, one of your fellow PCs or something. We'll have to be careful not to let that get too big, but I think that is something we probably should include in our MVP. What does everybody think of that?
I mean, I think it's good if we're encouraging cooperation and teamwork, then having that help option would definitely work with that.
Okay.
That sounds good to me. The only thing I don't understand is, would that be basically eliminated if you're playing the game solo?
Yes. So we would need to.
Okay.
So that's a technical spec thing. So let's say for that help other PC menu option, Valerie, that if playing solo, that is removed from the menu option. So we need to put in some basic logic that basically says if If not solo, offer this option. If solo, don't offer this option. Anybody else? All right, I'm going to go to another one. Oh, gosh darn it, keyboard. Okay, I found it anyway. Who's familiar with the classic? Goodness gracious.
So many ads.
Oh, they've gotten so spammy.
This is why I have ad block on my computer.
Yeah, and I normally, on my computers I do. This is the studio one, and that causes issues.
Welcome.
Who's
Pressure
familiar
100 points.
with the classic Gauntlet?
I am.
This is classic. Another big coin eater. The first one wasn't as bad as the second one. Gauntlet 2 was a ripoff. Gauntlet 1 was playable. You put a lot of coins in, but you could, if you used tactics, if you had long-term strategy and short-term tactics, you could get through it on, I think it was a minimum 50 cents to play the game. But you could, as a group, get through it if you were careful and played together as a group, right, with that synergy. If you all worked together.
I remember playing this once in an arcade.
If you don't know what you're doing, it's a really frustrating game. When they came out with Gauntlet 2 some years later, it was just a coin eater. They just got greedy and tried to cash in because Gauntlet was very popular. And it sucked. It was just a total coin eater. There was no... It was awful. But this is
Such
Gauntlet.
great...
What's that?
Such great sound design, this game.
Oh, I love the don't shoot the food. Warrior needs food badly. I use that in my life all the time. Let's see, there's Gauntlet 2. It's awful. I'm trying to find group. Let's see. First of all, get this spelled correctly. My keyboard's giving me grief. The wireless Gauntlet group. Okay, I don't know. Okay, is that the arcade? Let's see. Because that looks all like just one. Trying to find one that has an actual group playing through.
Now, get the Samsung Galaxy S25.
Gosh. Oh, goodness, it's a double whammy. All right. Nope, it's still just one.
Welcome. Pressure 100 points.
There's no group playthrough? Huh. Well, anyway, it was a you had the option to have up to 4 players together. And so that was the key to it, is if the 4 of you went together, you could really do it. And, oh, it looks like they've done a modern version of it. Huh. So, and that's the key thing, is that each person in the group controlled their own PC and could go off and do their own thing, but ultimately the way you played is you went from room to room together. You each did your own thing. You shot your own thing. You grabbed your own thing. You did whatever. But you went together as a group, because if you ever split up the group, you were dead very, very quickly. And so that's kind of how we want to design this with the without the graphical interface type. So I don't know if that helped or made things more confusing. I was hoping it would help a little bit. Comments?
So so we still want people to be able to make decisions as a group, right? Like
we for minimal viable product, everybody will decide their own actions for their own PC. We do want, and this should be in the technical scope, Valerie, we want audio, we want text and or audio chat. The minimum we want is text chat. And then it'd be nice to have audio chat as well. But text chat's the minimum. Text chat obviously won't work with BCI. So that's where the audio chat would be helpful, where somebody is playing the game with the BCI and then verbally saying, hey, I want to do this. So the way they coordinate is through that chat. They just need to socially, say what they want to do or not. So that's up to them how they want to do that. Each person only controls their PC. We will not have an option, as we did in Neverwhere Nights, we will not have a PvP option. There will never be... Oh, good, you got a link for chat. Good. I remember reading that. It was pretty straightforward. There will not be a PvP option in the game. And there will not be any, in the MVP version, minimal viable product version, there will not be a collateral damage option. So if they cast Fireball, it's not going to, singe your compatriots, for example. Does that make sense? And again, we're talking MVP here. Comments?
No, I just wanted to make sure that we're still keeping the group aspect for the multiplayer stuff.
Yeah, that will be tied. So again, you're all together in the same room, together from room to room or scene to scene, whatever it is. Everybody is together.
Okay.
Multiplayer. We are not allowing in 1.0 splitting up the party. So just think you're all side by side. The four of you come into a room together side by side. What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? What do you do? Right? NPC back and forth. But you're always kind of glued together as you go from room to room. I guess you could kind of think of it as a Hydra in a way. You don't really have a group consensus at the lower level because you're all going together. But we'll have to figure out how that works as far as going from scene to scene, because if one PC wants to leave before the others, we'll have to figure that out, how that works. I guess we could make it a simple rule that if you leave the room, you're kind of sit in limbo until the rest of the group joins you. What do you think of that? Just a simple, again, we're talking 1.0 MVP. That if, let's say you come into a room and you got the options of talk to the NPC, fight the NPC, help a PC, or take exit C, right? And there may be more options, but you get the idea. And one of the players decides to take exit C, while one decides to talk to the person and one decides to fight. And it's going to depend on the order, right? So one's going to leave the room. If they leave the room, do we just sit them in buffer, basically? Say, well, you left the group. You're going to have to wait till the group joins you. We'll have to make sure there aren't too many options here. This is where it gets tricky without the group consensus thing. But we want to make it just as simple as possible. We want to get as close to a solo adventure book option. So here's an idea. This might help everybody. Have any of you? I know Nicholas has a little bit. I don't know about Nick. Have any of you sat in on our level 1 training week 2 where we play through Wizard of Firetop Mountain?
I don't believe I have.
Anybody? All right. I think this would be a good training exercise to try to make this clearer to everybody, for us to work out some of the details at the program level.
Is there a use equipment option too?
Yes.
Because that's a thing that.
Yes, you're right. We should have a use yeah. We'll have to figure out all those mechanics of your character inventory and stuff.
Because that could be a way to help another person too, if you could use
exactly.
on.
Like give them a potion or something like that. And what it'll have to do is it'll have to be drill down menus. Help a person. Who do you want to help? What do you want to use from your inventory? What do you want? We'll have to figure out the logic of that. But yeah, definitely, I agree. So Valerie, make sure that's in the technical scope, that we have the ability to choose items, equipment, potions, etc. Okay, we just had this out this weekend.
One thing I thought of for inventory and database stuff, there's this tool we use in my university called draw.io. It's like Visio based in Google Drive for free. That probably would be really helpful so we can see how we're going to do this visually.
Okay. Share that info and have people take a look.
Cool.
So what I think we'll do, we're out of time to do it for today. We only got about 12 minutes left, and this is a full process. I think what we could do next week, it might help everybody grok this a little better. Does everybody know what I mean when I say grok this?
Yeah.
Anybody not know what I mean? Okay, just want to
I
make sure.
don't.
Okay, so basically, it's an old programming Unix world thing of basically saying, do you get the information? Do you get the idea of this? You get the general info of this. So if you grok it, you get it. That's basically what it means. It's going back to the Unix world. I don't remember the exact what's the history of it, but
Sorry, but I have to leave a little bit now. I have other events I need to attend to today. I'll watch the rest of the video later.
I'm sorry, it's a Heinlein phrase. Okay, well, yeah, watch the video later then. So,
Uh,
Valerie,
very
everybody,
sorry.
you're
Thank you,
okay
but-
with next week, and we need everybody to attend. How about we go through one of these as a team? And I think it'll help you understand a little bit the shared experience. But what we'll do is normally it's one PC. We'll let you each create a PC, but we'll do it in this solo adventure book style where you have limited choices. Right, so we'll do it in a controlled. We'll do a tabletop solo adventure book simulation of what it would be like electronically. What do you think of that? I think that'll help us with our design. Everybody on board with that?
Yes.
Sure.
Sounds good.
Okay. So I'll have to decide between Warlock and Firetop Mountain or Fabled Lands. They're two different play styles. Warlock is more linear, and Fabled Land is more exploratory. It's more sandboxy. And I'll have to think about that. I think for what we're doing, we might want to do Fabled Lands, the more sandboxy one, because we are allowing in the game for them to kind of wander around the island. But so that's one question: is if we're going to do a more map-driven, it's going to be menu. All right. Well, you know what? We might have to play through both. We might have to play through this style and then play through the other style and see which we think is appropriate for the MVP. These are both playable to a certain extent pretty quickly. We'll have to do some adaptation because they're only meant for solo play, but it's easy enough to adapt. So I think that might be really helpful for us in our design phase and everybody be on the same page, that we simulate the experience in a tabletop setting. So let's just make sure we have really good attendance for that next week, and then everybody will get to take turns deciding. We'll figure out from an analog side, we'll figure out the rules that we need to make that rotation work in that kind of setting where you're all kind of stuck together. And then we just have to write the code for that down the road as far as the logic for it. But we need to figure out the logic now. I think that will help us a lot. Sound good?
Yep, sounds good to me.
Yeah, I think it would benefit us if we did both of those games.
Anybody think we should focus on something else next week as a higher priority? I think this will help us with our scoping and our technical. But I'm open to if you think something else is a higher priority.
No, I think you're right. I think that would help us get a better idea of what we have to scope and how to conceptualize the game.
Okay. Anybody else?
Do we have an idea of when we're moving into actual
coding?
Yeah. No, and I was wondering because I don't know, like, are we all supposed to be on the same version, and are we all like able, like, I've personally never used GitHub in Godot.
Okay.
And I don't know how that's going to work when we split up all the components. I don't know if that's
none of us have, so we're going to be figuring
Yeah.
it out. So that's certainly something we can do in parallel, where like next week, if we want to. So between now and next week, you can work on getting your development environment set up and getting linked to your GitHub into our repository. So that would be a good assignment between now and next week if you haven't done so already. I think some of you already started that, right? Or maybe not.
not in good.
Okay, so everybody, let's make sure between now and next week we set up our development environment for Godot to be usable, and that we're linked to either your individual GitHub or our group GitHub, right? Because you're going to do your individual work and then you're going to be doing stuff as a group. So as you're experimenting and learning stuff, do that in your own individual GitHub. Play around with that with your own GitHub repository, just as you learn Godot. When you're working on the project, you're going to be pulling into a different GitHub there, which you should be able to do that. So set both of those up, your own private GitHub and the RPG Research GitHub. And I think that's a good technical side for us to have ready for next week, okay? And Valerie, if you could make sure those Luke and who else left?
Trevor.
Trevor, make sure that they know that's an assignment between now and next week, and I'll get mine set up as well.
Oh, I'm here.
Yeah, he came back.
Okay, good.
I left for the phone call.
That's right,
Then my
that's right. Yeah,
thing died,
sorry.
now I'm back.
Okay. Well, just make sure everybody gets that info that they need to have that set up, and then we'll verify that's working for everybody next week, and then we'll jump into one or the other of these. We won't be able to do both in the same session. We'll have to pick one or the other. So I'm going to play through. I've done the Warlock one a number of times as part of training. I haven't done the Fabled Lands in I don't know how long, so I might evaluate that. I think it's going to be. I think it's more map driven, but I could be misremembering. I'll find out. But one of these we'll go through, but we'll each have a different character. There's a character generation process in these. Again, it's meant only for one character, but that helps us simulate this constrained environment where it's menu only options, and we can figure out the logic of this. So this will be a pretty heavy technical specifications with some technical scope iterative process as we do this playthrough. And then I think we'll do the same thing next week with the other book, whichever one, switch to the other one. We don't have to finish either one by far, because some of these could take a while. The key thing is that we go through the process so that we understand what we need to do to put that into the electronic world. Make sense? All right, we got about 5 minutes. Anything else you guys want to cover at this point? Or have questions to dig further? We've got plenty to cover, so just pick whatever you want to go into next.
Hawk, when did we want to start using wireframes?
I think next week we're going to be. I'm going to put a whiteboard up here on the table right here with the camera pointing the other way, where you can see your character sheets, and I think we're going to end up creating a little bit of a very primitive character sheet wireframe just for that, right? That's going to happen. And we're not going to do the tool wireframe next week because we're going to be focusing on the gameplay, but it will inform probably 2 weeks from now the tool wireframe. So let's say 3 weeks from now.
Okay.
So
I've been looking into options, but I'll just basically make a chart like we did for the engine and just be like, here's the features that it has, and then we can kind of match it to what we're using.
Perfect. So next week we'll do one of these books. The following week we'll do the other book. We'll do a playthrough of each, because one, as I said, is more narrative focused and the other is more sandboxy. And we'll kind of see which approach do we want to have in our game. That's certainly something in 2.0. Let's put that in technical specs wish list 2.0. Choose between railroady and sandboxy, right? Using the map versus only using the menus. That's something that would be a nice feature down the road. For MVP, we have to just pick one. We're not going to, so that's a future thing where you can pick the two. So we have to figure out which one of these we want, because they both have pros and cons. So with the sandboxy version, there's a map. You click on the hex that you want or whatever, and then it shows you the information from there. And that's not too dissimilar to the Neverwinter Nights experience up until you interact with the NPC. With the other version, it's closer to Choose Your Own Adventure, where you just have menu options every step of the way. It's not about a map. You may or may not keep a map yourself, but it's much more constrained. And probably for 1.0, we probably want to limit it to that. But I'd like you both to get an experience of each, and then, because then if we want to incorporate that in 2.0, you have a better understanding of the sandbox approach. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah, makes sense to me.
Okay. All right. So Valerie, was there another topic on that list of stuff that you wanted to address that at least touch on?
A lot of the stuff we've kind of covered since I had these questions written down, so I don't have any current questions. Just that I'm going to have to go through the text spec and kind of rework the layout, because what I've been noticing during these meetings is I'm not writing anything in the document itself. I'm writing it all. This needs to go into the text spec because it's like I don't know where to put it. Okay. So that's going to be a little project that I'm going to have to work on, but you might see a lot of weird changes in that document, and that's why.
Okay, great. Appreciate that very much. All right, well then I think we can go ahead and any last questions or comments anybody here? So assignments are, if you haven't already watched Dragon's Lair, the playthrough, watch it. I've already shown you Crossbow and Gauntlet. If anybody missed that, Valerie, make sure that they had that, put it in our list of things, for background sources. Your assignments are, everybody make sure you have Godot set up and linked to your own GitHub repo, and that you have a project set up to talk to the RPG Research GitHub separately, so that both GitHub connections are made on your Godot between now and next week. And then we'll go ahead and we'll check in on everybody, make sure they've done that, taken care of that next week, and if there are any problems with it, we'll address them, and then we'll go ahead and do the playthrough of one of these two. Sound good? All right. Thank you very, very much. I think that's it. Okay. Sounds like my audio, because I moved the mic away. Sorry for those on YouTube if you couldn't hear me, because it looks like it was turned way down. Apologies for that. Anywho, we'll see you all next week. Have a great week. Thanks very much for being here, and we'll be back. So those of you on the stream, RPG Research is a 501c3 nonprofit research and human services organization and charity studying the effects of all role-playing game formats for their potential to improve lives around the world. You can donate at rpgresearch.com/donate. You can volunteer at rpgresearch.com/volunteer if you'd like to join as a developer. This is the electronic role-playing game division. We're working on a turn-based multiplayer online role-playing game that can be played through a brain-computer interface, so that somebody like a tetraplegic, quadriplegic can actually play it with just their brain, or just anybody play it with their brain, in a multiplayer online turn-based role-playing game. It's quite a challenge. It's all open source. We certainly, happy to get more and more developers on the team. You can check us out at bcirpg.com for more information. And do consider signing up or donating, because donating will help us get more BCI equipment and such. And wherever you may be well, happy gaming, and Namarie.